Muy buenas tardes.
Vamos con otro invitado muy
Good
especial.
afternoon. We're going to continue with another very special guest, Marco Ticairos from Digital Solutions. Hello, Carlos. Hello, Charles. How are you? Here we are.
Con su presencia, es un placer tenerte aquí con
It's
nosotros.
a pleasure to have you here with us.
CEO y fundador de Digital Solutions, que es una empresa consultora.
De agilidad empresarial. Él es ingeniero informático y
He's an IT engineer
de la
and
Escuela
has an
Profesional
MBA
Industrial, con más de
from the
15 años
Industrial
trabajando
Organization
en
School and has been working for over 15 years in digital transformation.
y también
He's a
es
professor of the business school and also a
El
usual
tema de su
speaker.
presentación será
The subject of his presentation will be
al
how to
presidente y a su
explain
consejo de
DevOps
dirección.
to the chairman and the board of
Antes de comenzar,
directors.
le
Before we
quisiera hacer
begin,
una pregunta. La
if you
pregunta
have
va a ser
any questions,
muy
please
interesante.
use
La
the chat.
presentación dura 40 minutos
The
y al final
presentation will last 40 minutes,
preguntas y
and
respuestas.
at the end we'll have 10 minutes
Comenzar,
for
nuestra
Q&A. Are you
presentación
ready
está
to start?
Muchas gracias.
Well, okay, go ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, while I'm sharing my screen, I'd like to thank the organization because it's made things very easy for us, and it's a fantastic opportunity to share these minutes with you. As Charles was saying, we have a challenge in our presentation. What we want to do is to talk about what we expect from this session. Reading about all the sessions and all the speakers, it's absolutely spectacular, both the level of knowledge, the level of expertise, and the technological and product know-how are covered by these sessions today. And I'm the CEO and founder. We're a company with some 500 people, but I'm not a technology expert in the world of DevOps. So my expectation is to share with you how we can provide that other view, sometimes a more business view, when we tackle major technological transformation processes. So what I expect from the session is to share this reflection of how we can do things differently. I've arranged the presentation with three stories. Then we have a reflection on where we are today and why. Then we're going to move on to how we tackle the problem and how we explain all this. And finally, another reflection and some final conclusions. Let me tell you the first story. This is a human eye, and as you recognize, we're all used to using our eye. And when we look at a drop of water, this is what we see. This is fantastic, a perfect drop of water. This is what our eye sees. If, on the other hand, we go into an American or Asian marketplace, buy a home microscope, and we want to spend 90 euros, 85 euros, I don't know what the exact price is today. And if we put that same raindrop under the microscope, this is what we're going to see. You're going to go from one view to a completely different view that's full of life, full of problems, microorganisms of all kinds. But there's even more. Look at what happens if I put that same drop of water under one of the most powerful microscopes in the world. This one we have on the screen. And at this very moment, what I can see in an enormous size is what we have on the screen. These are about zero point 0.5 microns in size. It looks enormous here. It looks like almost a bear. This is one of the most resistant microorganisms on Earth. It's capable of surviving in vacuum, in the universe, with no gravity, at zero temperature, at 200 degrees below. Anywhere in the world, these tardigrades are everywhere. It's the most resistant creature that humankind knows today. They can go 10 years without water, they can hibernate for 60 years. A microorganism that is hundreds of millions of years old. But what I'm trying to explain is the different level of things, depending on whether I see them one way or another. The first story. The second is closely related to the first. It's related to the chromatic view of Homo sapiens. When we go out in a field, now it's spring, almost summer, it doesn't matter if it's a field in Spain, in the French English countryside, it doesn't matter. We have a spectacular field with splendid, radiant spring flowers. And we all say how beautiful these flowers are. But why do they have this color? But we have to remember that flowers were here long before us, long before Homo sapiens, long before hominids, millions of years before us. So what happens if instead of looking at these flowers with our chromatic sight system, if I look at them with ultraviolet light, if I look at them with ultraviolet light, which crucially is the way in which the sectors in charge of pollinizing flowers see them, what I see is a completely unknown world of colors, of relationships, of ecosystems, and they answer questions like this. I don't know how often it's happened to you. If you look at a flower with a spider on top, you'll ask, how does this spider manage to camouflage itself? Any predator will see it. But if we see it as insects do through ultraviolet light, it's indistinguishable from the flower because their eyesight is completely different to yours, so they see it differently. The third story is also related to what we see. All three stories are similar in this sense. If I buy a telescope in the same place we bought the microscope, a domestic telescope with this homemade wooden support, and I point this telescope at the sky to see the universe. And if we're lucky, I can see a planet, some shiny stars, and I have a view that looks pretty to me. If I take an image, on the other hand, from the Hubble telescope, the telescope, the most powerful telescope orbiting around the Earth, is about to be replaced, but it's given us many decades of glory and extraordinary pictures like this one of the most famous, where each dot is not a planet. Many of those dots are galaxies with millions of stars and planets. And we're seeing it with the same human eye. But of course, we're seeing things differently. And what I'd like to tell you here, and I'd like to use an image that you all know, and I'd like you to spend 30 seconds on this. What often happens is that when we're looking at things from a certain level, which has nothing to do with the level from which other people are looking at it, what happens is that at that moment, the way in which we see problems is different. And that's why we often have the feeling that some people see that we're drowning in a glass of water and others are seeing a radically different problem. And this is the image I was referring to. And this is what the talk is going to revolve around today. You know that this image is very well known, an optical illusion, where some of you will be seeing a young lady and others will be seeing an adult or elderly lady, and you're both seeing exactly the same image, but you're perceiving reality with regard to the problems and the vision itself in a radically different way. The key to all this, and let me use the metaphor once again, what glasses do I use to look at the problems, the solutions, or the needs? When we often face a technology transformation process, and the hiring party, the party that has to be convinced, is on a radically different plane to yours, although they both see the same thing, they perceive it in a radically different way. This is the feeling of seeing a certain type of small problem when others are seeing a radically different situation or a much bigger problem. And what I'm trying to say with this part of the presentation is that whenever any of the solutions, products, technologies, innovations, transformations, whatever, you have to clearly understand the glasses that others are using to perceive you and the value you're providing. So the big question, how can we explain a DevOps and cloud project to the chairman of a major corporation? How do we face this situation? How do we face this problem? And in a completely constructive and open way, when we look at 80% of the sessions over these 2 days, there is technology, technological tools. There are sessions on the efficiency and the use of one tool or another. There's a lot about clouds, multi-clouds, hybrid clouds, a lot of fundamental things. But how do we explain it? How do we take the discourse to that plane where I don't want to see a fantastic spring flower with ultraviolet light? I want to see the same thing you're seeing. And in order to achieve this, we first need to reflect. We first need to understand what is an organization as a whole. What are the governing and managing bodies in this organization? And let's make a brief historical summary of why we're here. We can never forget that an organization is defined, and here you can see it for Toyota, of individuals that are not independent, they're interdependent. And the aim is to pursue the collective intelligence of the group. In other words, for the group to generate more knowledge than the people do individually. And the objective is how to create an aligned organization of individuals, each of them having the DNA of the organization and learning together to add value to the customer. And the last bit is the key, to add value to the customer. The first person to define this concept of organization is Peter Drucker. And he basically started to align all these individuals in a larger structure, a social structure, bringing humans together to work in this organization. 1943. What we've done since then is to work on this organizational structure, and we see this later on. Nowadays, there's a very big leap where we say, well, great, but in the digital world, what we're saying is that this organization has to compete in a different environment, has to have a different value response, it has to have new sources of revenue, it has to be much more cost efficient, because any digital market shrinks a non-digital market. Therefore, this is going to be key in any future digital market. And what I'm going to do with all my talent team, and what am I going to do with what I have? And from here, we start to create governing organizations that define how organizations work and operate. This was painted by Alfred Sloan in General Motors, and he was the first one to paint the roles of the president, the executive committee, the board of directors, the divisions, brands, units, global teams, local teams, the separation of staff and management, 1921. The basic organizational scheme in any company that is defined as a major corporation is based on what Alfred Sloan painted 100 years ago as an organizational model, thought out to sort out a certain type of problems with types of solutions that are not today's. It helps us to organize the company, painting the vertical layers, the horizontal layers, the walls between rooms, where my company ends and where my customers start. And then he created the concept of geographic identity to determine how we're going to go from being federated companies, multi-division companies, to global companies, which are not the same thing. All these fathers of the classic strategy, Sloan, Chandler, Ziert, Porter, Ansoff, Bruce, Henderson, they had their splendor between 1930 and 1970 and cover the basics of competitive strategy, organizational strategy, and all these members, the president, the board of directors or executive committees are what are understood to be a part of the strategy, because they are what for decades has been the great manifesto of thinking in the organizations. We've defined the major strategic management plans of the organization, major plans with strategic landmark for compliance that are defended as plans before the investors, that these plans are reported on every year, and these are multi-annual plans between 2 and 5 years. And in the financial press, you'll see that a company presents a new strategic plan 2023, 2028. They're based on a strategic planning scheme like this one here. They're based on a scheme of saying, this is what I have as a mandate to comply with this strategic plan for my investors. I organize the company, I define the how, the when, and where I want to compete. I look at the environment, look at my competitive advantages, I analyze my internal competitiveness, I establish the strategy, the plan, I implement it, I control it, I measure it, I control the return on the investment of the plan, I guarantee the return through economic variables that I have to defend before a third party. For this planning process starts with the company. I break it down into divisions or countries. I break it down into bigger units. I break it down into functional units. And from there, I build the strategy to take it to the top, to have a single strategic plan for the company. After that, I define how I want people to play their roles in this strategic planning. This was defined by Taylor and Fayol. Henry Fayol was born in 1841 and died in 1925. I define how I'm going to measure and work with people and divisions, and I'm going to measure the mindset through a promotion, through the promotion model, through the role model, through the definition or eradication of the internal enemy syndrome. In other words, when one clearly understands the strategic transformation, the enemy is either outside or inside, and we need to know why people work and what is their goal for working. And this is needed by any transformation process. So I have to see how I'm going to arrange this way of working and create an organization like a machine that has to enable me to carry this out. this president, board of directors, and this organization that they govern from the corporate point of view only exists for a single reason, because it creates value. We can never forget that a company that doesn't create value for its customers doesn't exist. It only exists and it only makes sense if a company satisfies the needs of the customer at the right time, in the right place, and at the right price. We can talk about DevOps, LMOps, FinOps, whatever we want. If none of that creates value for the customer, the value of that is zero. Because what does creating value mean? When we look at value creation by this board of directors, the language or the terminology is that the first thing we have to understand is that they're looking at companies like an ecosystem from a very high level, something that's tremendously complex, full of different species, and they can't see what's lying on the ground. When you look at things from the top, the problem is that the grass is not growing properly. But somebody that sees it from this height can't understand what's actually going on because they're not capable of digesting what you're telling them. With systemic thinking, they basically have to understand their global impact, the impact on a country, the impact on functions, on customers, on a regulatory level, technical plan, investors, technology. And they're looking at it from a very high level, like that jungle. They're seeing the jungle, but they can't see what's inside the jungle. When they talk about the movement of different units, the view is more like geopolitical chessboards. What do I want to put in one country? What do I want to take away from another? What do I want to sacrifice? What do I want to open? What status are we in today? And of course, people are important. But when you're on this level, the concept of individual becomes something much bigger. In a company with hundreds of thousands of employees, you can't look at an individual. You have to look at something much bigger to compete on a global level through a multinational corporation. And I'm not going to reveal what company this is from, but if we go into this in the investor relations website, if we go in to the value of the company regarding that external government, these are the indicators we can see: the profits, the expected return on assets, the capital I need, the efficiency of the company, the benefits per share, including tangibles and intangibles, and finally the profits of the companies. These are 6 macro indicators measuring the value of the company. So what's the point? If we're self-critical, if we think about how a technology department has been seen by a board of directors or an executive committee that has been in place for a number of years, well, the first thing I have to say is that they've seen all sorts of pendulum in front of them, all sorts of currents, all sorts of models, global, decentralized, mainstream, independent, as units joined on the business side, as separated units, distributed companies, companies that have certain tax benefits. They've seen all sorts of things. They see it as something that's extremely expensive. The more money you throw at it, the more they spend. But it's not so easy to measure the return on investment of the transformation. But I do know that the DAU grows every year. The more I invest today, the more costly it will be to maintain in the future. Therefore, they've always seen it as a significant item. The technology departments have been seen as a major expense in many companies, not in all of them. You can't generalize, but when they tried to go into it in depth, we'd say, oh, it's very complex. Oh, this is very complicated. Don't try to get into the details. And if we do have to explain, we put them in front of a blackboard and we say, "Look, imagine how difficult it is to operate this. The systems collapse. It's very difficult. Security, information systems. This is all very complicated to manage." And if not, try to understand something. And when they've tried to go into it in greater detail, they realize that the value that technology teams believe they provide is very close to craftsmanship, of being elegant in their simplicity, of having good metrics for the code, having good architectures, a good lead time per product, a good opinion of the technical teams, the latest tools, the best quality, the lowest incidence rate, the best coverage, the best confidence in decision making, always at the forefront. These are the indicators they use when they go to their investors. And that's how they're being measured. When they take that to a different plane, they change their glasses. And from saying that something is extremely expensive, complicated, and with a certain number of priorities, and these are the Huns, if you'll excuse the joke, they're considered to be one of the most ferocious people. When you try to carry out an organizational change in a technology department, or try to mainstream as something, well, this becomes a whirlwind of enormous complexity, an internal battle between the business side, the financial side, the technology side, and things got really complicated, and this created the internal enemy syndrome. So they've seen all sorts of fashions go by, not just models, but fashions. They've seen the same fashion go by. This is an example, the same metaphor of how things go round and the same fashion comes back. They've seen all this pass in front of them. We're not going to be the first to talk about a DevOps transformation. We're not the first to try to explain things. And they presenting another hype, or is it something else? In the 70s, they already spoke about lean transformation, empowerment, speed, lead time, the corporate culture, the just-in-time technology, operating excellence, code quality circles. The end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, when we came in with the message of DevOps, cloud transformation, etc. The first thing they're thinking, well, is this another hype? A lot of technology experts talk to them from a lot of companies, from a lot of internal teams, from a lot of new solutions. And what they tell them is, don't worry. We know that this technology thing is very complicated, but we have a tool, a solution, or a power stream that is going to encapsulate this complexity you've had for decades. It's going to put it in a capsule and send it to space. Don't worry. We'll take away the complexity. The first thing you have to know is that anybody with enough experience in a large corporation knows that in any approach, when they're told, I'm going to encapsulate and remove your complexities, the first thing is that they won't believe you. The question they ask themselves is, do you think that we're not clever enough or don't have people good enough to not have done this ourselves before? So there's always a mistrust of solutions that want to encapsulate a problem. So today, what are we doing? Well, we say no. What we have today are spectacular DevOps technology trends. It's no longer continuous delivery, it's progressive delivery. We have a cycle time in the cloud. We have securitization in software, automated software tools, continuous delivery tools, low coding. And we're going with all this. We're saying that it's not just DevOps. Now we want a DevSecOps plan. We complicate things even more.
But of course, we are now standing in front of them and we've made them sit down and we've convinced them that there are major challenges to be dealt with. But the major challenge of them all is one, and that is that any company that does not carry out a technological transformation that should have already started and should be made much more intensely, done much more intensely over the next few years, if those companies don't do that, they're going to have a blockbuster moment. Any company that does not develop a technological transformation, an in-depth technological transformation, are going to have problems. They're going to have very difficult. So it's going to be very difficult for them to survive in the next few years. Because what is clear is that this major technological transformation, which has a component of national policies of the different countries, but we have to square the circle because we're talking about a multi-annual program, and many of them that start these plans are not going to finish. So that's why I said before that many of the major transformations of a country are longer than an electoral cycle. So how are we going to convince somebody about a plan? Because many of them are never going to work out. Because investments relative to EBITDA is enormous. It's not only 2% of EBITDA for 3 years, because the only thing that you are doing is patching things up. And second, there has to be a transformation of the organizational structure, because when you touch the organizational structure, we're talking about reducing or making the organization smaller. We're talking about simplifying the organization, and you know how complex that can be. We're talking about changing the roles and the functions, and many of the problems that the organizational structure has that is designed for 2021, but it's of no use for a digital world. So this has to do with, if not failures, perhaps disappointments of some projects that have to be stopped. And it's not the first time that some people try to carry them out. And you always have the doubt, will it work this time? This is a transversal transformation process, because you no longer know who's responsible for what. And there are people that feel frustrated too, because they think, okay, look, we've got 3, 4, or 5 different points of view. They don't add on, they rather subtract. And then we time to market, which is one of the main competitive advantages. In other words, this has to be done now. And I know that it's going to be a very long path. I know that it's going to be very costly. It's going to be very harsh. It's going to be very difficult. But without this, we will not have a future. Because we're not saying we're going to do a little bit to see if you can do a couple of things so that you can become digital. And let's see what happens. No, this is what we're asking companies to do. We're telling them, look, just because you start, that doesn't mean that you're going to finish. This process is going to take years. It's going to be a multi-annual program that has to be separated from cycles, from management, and also has to be separated from the governance. So how can we get it done? So when you submit this plan, and when you put across some messages, we always start off by saying that this is an investment and transformation plan. And I believe that what we have to put across here is how much can I potentially increase the ROI in this transformation plan. And what you need to know in this transformation plan, well, you need to have enough operational efficiency, because what I want to know in the case of my metrics, I want to know if I'm going to make more, and that means that I will increase the potential ROI, or if I'm going to be more efficient in what I do, because one of the major metrics is operational efficiency, okay? So I want to know which of the 2 variables I'm going to be playing with. And don't tell me what you want to do, just tell me how I'm going to achieve this. And this is the language that I want to speak. Because when you have a multi-annual plan, and how many years is it going to take you? Is it going to be 2, 3, or 4? Don't tell me how many years. Just tell me how much payback I'm going to have when I recover the investment. Just tell me how many years later I'm going to be able to consider that I have a payback that for me is acceptable in terms of the investment. So don't talk to me about a governance model. Don't talk to me about a strategic plan. Don't talk to me about delivery landmarks, and don't talk about agility, or don't talk about portfolio management or management portfolio. But well, please, I have to present strategic plan to my investors, and let me know how this fits in. Tell me how I will be able to measure within this plan the value that I'm giving to these people, or the future value expectations that I'm going to be given to them, but it has to be something believable. So in other words, link the governance model to the value that has been delivered, or to the future expectations I have in terms of value. And don't talk about solutions, don't talk about digital tools, and don't talk about technical terms, and don't use technology. I'm not sure if this is a hype or not. And don't use any work models that I'm not capable of differentiating either. And how do I know that they are going to help what really matters to me? And how am I going to transform my distribution model? It could be any company, a retail or utility or oil and gas or banks or insurance companies or logistics. Digital and technology is transforming the value distribution model that is then encapsulated in a product or in a solution. And this model is either new things, or it's a model that means that I'm doing things much more efficiently. But don't give me the details. I want you to tell me how you are contributing towards my challenge of transforming and improving my value distribution model that is encapsulated in a product and a solution or a service. Don't talk to me about automation. Talk to me about time to market. Talk to me about cost savings, and talk to me about savings in organizational structures. So in other words, what can I make more efficient if I automate something? And well, somebody else will have to deal with the hype. Cost efficiency will be addressed by somebody else. But what I want to know is the savings in organizational costs and time to market to deliver more value, and how I'm capable of making the organizational structure more efficient, or the human structure. Don't talk to me about cloud. Talk about revenues. Talk to me about resilience in capital cost versus organizational cost. And talk to me about simplifying structures. Talk to me about increasing operational efficiency. Talk to me about maximizing deliveries to customers. I don't understand the cloud concept, because cloud could be a hype, and it could give rise to a multi-cloud or edge computing or hybrid cloud concept, or whatever you want. But on the right-hand side, this is for 10 years, because I'm always capable of transforming the left-hand side. If I transform it to the right-hand side, things will go well. Those of you that are experiencing transformation from within are in this situation. You are pushing uphill steel balls that your own areas or colleagues are placing more and more balls on top to make it difficult for those that are pushing to be successful. Because many times the challenge of why we have to do this is not clear. Although I have to say something else. This transformation plan that you have to submit has also got to be solved from the point of view of resilience. And I would like to finish with another story, because nobody knows to date what the exact solution is going to be like in 4 years' time. And well, history has shown us, and this is the Delta plan that took place in Holland for many years, where in the year 1953, there was one of the worst floods. Practically 25% of the territory was flooded in the Netherlands. In other words, it was a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. And the truth is that it was a tremendous flood. And what they decided is that for the next 40 years, they had to build a number of dams and different kinds of constructions to prevent another potential significant rise in the tide of the North Sea, so that Holland could be protected on the western coast, so that this doesn't happen again. But what nobody noticed is that in the year 1999, the flood didn't come from the sea, it came down the Danube. And it was equally complicated, or even worse, than what happened in 1953. So therefore, even though you work on a plan for 40 years, you could always be surprised. You have to be flexible in that plan, and you have to leave spaces that it can be mobile. You have to achieve greater levels of efficiency, but never forget that the ultimate purpose of your transformation plan is Alle jactas, as they say in Latin. So you can never forget that this plan has a number of clear concepts and fundamental principles that cannot be changed. And this is the terminology that the chairman and the board of directors are always going to understand. And that it's you people are the ones that have to make the effort, and you have to see reality as they see reality too. Thank you all very much. And here, this is where the session finishes. Charles, how can we address the questions? Well, thank you very much.
La verdad es que me gustó mucho
I really enjoyed
la presentación.
your presentation a lot. It was very inspirational.
Fue cómo hiciste la analogía.
But it was funny to see how you established an analogy
Esta complejidad,
as a craftsman of high complexity and then implementation at high cost,
comité de dirección.
compared to what the board believes. Will this become a new fashion?
Realmente importa
And finally, what really matters is the returns, efficiency, and the payback on the investment,
valor, ¿cierto?
and the landmarks for the delivery of value, the value distribution model,
Vamos a
and
hacer
time to market,
acción y eficiencia.
and how we're going to carry out an organizational restructuring that is flexible and saves on costs.
Así que muchas gracias.
So thank you very much.
Hay una primera pregunta.
Well, there's a first question here, and I'm not sure if you're reading it or not. Can you see the question? No, I'm sorry, I can't see the questions.
La voy a copiar al chat.
Okay, well, I'll put it into the chat then. I'll copy it and send it via the chat. There it is.
Dice, has dado el clavo, Carlos.
Well, yes, you're completely right, Carlos. And, well,
Es que sonamos
you know that we're rejected because we sound like as if we were delivering smoke.
cosas con dificultad.
And I'm talking about companies with properly trained environments. So just imagine what it's like an SME, where there's not always a positive reception for this. And from my point of view, the only way
El único modo de
the only way of selling innovation and technological transformation is by providing real success models and by using or speaking a natural language, as you've done,
necesidad tienen como
and to
empresa la posible solución.
look into how we've addressed this potential solution from our company's perspective,
Cómo se ha estructurado el proceso y su
and how the process has been structured. And above all, we need to know what is achieved after making a human and economic effort. And everything else is just an attempt at adjusting our technical vocabulary to vocabulary that is more pragmatic. So the conclusion is that I've drawn here is that our happy customers are our best salesmen and our best portfolio, the products and services. Well, yes, I think that you've summarized many things in there. Thank you very much for the question. Well, more than selling innovation or transformation, well, firstly, we have to talk about the mindset of any business that does not become a technological business. Well, has no room in the world we live. This technological transformation is over and above digitization. It's one of the biggest technological revolutions of the history of mankind. And we're all seeing that there's a systemic convergence between exponential technologies at a given point in time. And companies logically, well, they can't be ready for things that they know nothing about. And they can't be ready when we tell them, well, no, this company is not well organized. And the company has a legacy and it has a faulty culture. Well, perhaps many of these things started 20 years ago. And perhaps 20 years ago, nobody knew what kind of technological speed we were going to develop today. But it has to be clear that a company exists because it delivers a value, and it exists because it wants to deliver that value to customers today and wants to carry on doing so in 5 years' time. And the company must understand that to deliver this value, they have to do different things, because this value that is delivered, if it becomes a commodity, and if it becomes a commodity, the price is reduced, and the customer is not paying enough for the service, so you can't keep the company up and running. So I cannot be in such a dynamic and ever-changing market where what I need is resilience to deliver on time to my customers when I have a different kind of typology, because what I always say is that you can't teach elephants to dance. Although if you have a problem you need an elephant for, that would obviously be the best animal. But I'm an IT engineer and I've been a technologist for many years. And well, this issue of craftsmanship, as you pointed out, is something that I like a lot. So you like to be up to date. But how many people say that this is a project that doesn't attract me because it's not the state of the art? And then you say, okay, well, look, in your value, what you're constructing has to have a value for the end customer. So from this point of view, and in all these fields, what happens, it's a little bit like working with scientists who are much more concerned about their research than the value they're delivering. So that's an extreme case, of course. But when, not only that, but when companies are providing a tremendous amount of technological talent with tools like those that I showed you before, and I'm convinced that in 1 year, I suppose that if you hold a similar event, there'll be 20% of new tools on the panel, okay? So just look at the transformation speed, and companies don't have enough time to digest this. And secondly, there's a shared responsibility, because a transformation of a company, when it's very large, it has a different fathers, okay? Because it's a complex. It's very difficult to know who's the owner of what exactly. And then, as Jack Wells pointed out, carrying out a technological transformation is like buying a company. So you get a team that does M&A and that deals with integration. And 90% of those people, what they're thinking about is, how can I carry out the integration? Because I don't want to be caught in by the synergies. So anybody that is in the technological transformation, even though they don't say so, subconsciously they're thinking, how's this going to affect me? What benefits is this going to have for me? Because if the result is going to be seen in 5 years and perhaps I'm not here anymore, or perhaps it's not worthwhile. Because I was comparing this with politics. If I have to draw up an 8-year plan, well, who's going to do it? So who's going to take on board the political cost of that decision? Well, companies, the same applies to them. But if they don't do that, they're going to have their blockbuster moment too. We have time for just one more question. It says, thank you very much, Carlos. That was very interesting. I think that IT professionals should they have a more extensive business vision to understand the strategy better? Do you think that an upskilling is required? And not for the technology executives? Well, the issue of reskilling and upskilling is fundamental. That always has to be present. But the thing is that the company should have the same goal. And here in human resources, a talent team has to think how they're going to measure the transformation, how they're going to compensate things, and how they're going to remunerate everybody. How am I going to work on that cultural side of things? How am I going to make people feel at ease, psychologically speaking, so that they can take the right decisions? And how am I going to create a secure environment? Because if you don't have that secure environment for the transformation, what happens is that we wouldn't be delivering the right value. But more than reskilling, which also applies, but well, apart from that, it's also about standing in line with the ultimate purpose of the transformation and the compensation model for people. And then finally, to deliver security through the transformation process. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much once again. And now we're going to change over into English. So after the video, I'm going to give the floor to Ben Nichols for the next keynote presentation. Do you really manage to deliver business value, sorry. And it's Ari van Benekun. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Thank you very much, Charles. A pleasure. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Cheers.